Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another video installment in eyeshadow palette week, where every single day for 7 days I am uploading some sort of content surrounding eyeshadow palettes. This is coming a month later than typically I would like. I like to do 4 eyeshadow palette weeks throughout the year, but I'm a little bit late because I just like don't have my life together in terms of like, well, really anything, but especially my YouTube channel this year. Today's video is going to be all of the eyeshadow palettes that I did not use throughout my collection, all the eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection that I did not use the first 6 months of the year. I have over 50 eyeshadow palettes to share with you guys today. My collection is in the like 160 to 175 range. I do need to do a palette declutter for sure, especially because I just have not been utilizing my makeup collection and my palette collection. And honestly, I've like gotten to that point again, which I've been like one other time that I can like vividly remember in my life. I've gotten to that point again where like I just feel like my makeup collection is overwhelming in a sense of like I just have too much stuff that I'm like not using, and it's making me feel like just like stressed out, and like that shouldn't be how I feel about my makeup collection. So I need to do some decluttering. But before we do that, I'm going to share all of the eyeshadow palettes that I have not used the first 6 months of the year. So it's possible that I've used these palettes sometime in the month of July, but I did not use these palettes anytime between January 1st through June 30th, 2022. Like I said, I have over 50 eyeshadow palettes to share. If you are new to my channel and you have not yet subscribed and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or honestly just chit chatting about makeup, I would love if you would consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's get into the video. All right, you guys, welcome. Like I said in the introduction, I have over 50 unused eyeshadow palettes to share. And I feel like I get sad every time I do one of these all the palettes that I haven't used videos, because I like look at my eyeshadow palette collection and I like I love eyeshadow. It's one of the parts obviously of my makeup collection that makes me feel truly like creatively inspired. But I've gotten to a point where I like truly feel very overwhelmed by my eyeshadow palette collection. And there are definitely some palettes that I do feel like I'm ready to declutter that I haven't used, or like I have used and I just like have been forcing myself to use. But today's video is just strictly focused on eyeshadow palettes that I have not used the first 6 months of the year. Some of these palettes I truly do love and have been favorites in the past. And so this is always like an eye-opening exercise, if you will, to like see what I've used versus what I've not used. I just pulled everything off of my eyeshadow palette bookshelf. So it's not gonna be necessarily in any particular order, but we're just gonna start with the stack that I have laid in front of me. And I have a large stack of Nabla eyeshadow palettes. And if you are not new to my channel, you know I personally have, like, I'm a stan for Nabla cosmetics in general. So the fact that the majority of my Nabla eyeshadow palette collection has gone unused truly makes me so sad. And basically all of my small 6-pan eyeshadow palettes, with the exception of possibly 1 or 2, have gone unused all of 2022, which makes me so sad. So up first, I have the Midnight Cutie palette. So this is a blue toned eyeshadow palette, and obviously not like an everyday eyeshadow palette for me, but I purchased this palette for a reason. I wanted to have a little bit more fun with blue eyeshadow. I have like a periwinkle blue shirt on today. I have some like teals and blues on my eyes today. Like I do want to have fun with blue eyeshadow, but I just haven't made the time to use this. And then obviously we have like a couple of neutrals like this and like an inner corner highlight, but like anyway, that is one of my unused. The Nabla Cutie Platinum. I love this eyeshadow palette. I really do. Now I haven't gone on a vacation yet this year, but this is truly a palette that I would take with me on vacation. So perhaps if I plan a vacation for myself this year, this is a palette that will come with me. I think it's a beautiful, cool toned eyeshadow palette, perfect for like a super sultry, more intense sultry look. But I really do like this one. It makes me sad to know that I haven't used this. My Nabla Cutie Metropolitan palette. Now this is not like an everyday eyeshadow palette for me, but I do love some of the like shimmery shadows within this. And honestly, this shade is pretty fun and I would like to get some use out of this. I do plan to do an eyeshadow palette declutter, and I feel like this is a palette I need to like put on my chopping block, because truly looking at this, I'm like, the only shadows that like truly get me excited is this shade, which is Nothing Personal, but like how often am I going to use a matte shade like this? Dissolution, I feel like I could get used out of, and then Alaska, but like truly this palette doesn't excite me. Like looking at this, I'm like, this palette doesn't excite me as much as I thought it might. So potentially this would be up for declutter. In the eyeshadow palette declutter that I will be posting during palette week. Then we have my Nabla Cutie Wildberry palette. Now this palette I love specifically for the shade Alchemy 2, which is the shade right here. I also do like this shade up here, the shimmer shade. Aside from that, I feel like I probably could do without this palette. So like honestly, thinking through this palette and this palette, I'm like, do I declutter these two in my next upcoming eyeshadow palette declutter and potentially purchase like Alchemy, like the original Alchemy from the Nabla website? I know there's some singles that I do want to purchase from Nabla. Like looking at this palette, it doesn't get me motivated or inspired to use this, but like if I just had the single, maybe it would. And like same thing with this. I'm glad that I'm filming this video before I do my declutter, because I'm like, maybe I actually don't need these two. We'll see. Keep an eye out for my eyeshadow palette declutter, which I think will be the last video throughout palette week, but I do need to do that declutter. And then I also have my Nabla Cutie Nude palette. Now I do love me a good nude eyeshadow moment, so even though this isn't the most exciting palette, I do feel like I can get some good use out of this. I swear I have used this in 2022, but as I look through my notes, I'm like, well, maybe I didn't. So this is one of my unused eyeshadow palettes of 2022, and this definitely needs to get some use because I do really enjoy this palette. Next up, I have two eyeshadow palettes from Lunar Beauty, and I honestly love both of these palettes from Lunar Beauty. So I got really sad when I was pulling all the palettes for this video and realized that I have not used both my Greek Goddess palette, which is this palette right here. This is a really beautiful eyeshadow palette if you like neutral shades. I really enjoyed this when I first started using this. I don't know that you can get this eyeshadow palette anymore, but truly this was like one of my favorite palettes of last year, so I'm very disappointed in myself for not reaching for it this year. And then also I have my Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette, which is a really beautiful cool toned eyeshadow palette. I love the neutrals in here, but I also love the pops of blue and just like the shimmery cool tones that again can make a really beautiful sultry smoky eye. So both of these definitely need to get some use in the very, very near future. Next up, I have a couple of quads here. So up first, I have my Charlotte Tilbury Exaggerize eyeshadow palette. Honestly, I just do not feel like the Charlotte Tilbury quads are worth it. If I could get my hands on the Fire Rose, which everyone raved about last year or 2 years ago, I would buy that. But like, I feel like I keep this around so that I have like a reference point to Charlotte Tilbury, and it's a fine eyeshadow palette, especially if I'm thinking like work travel. Like this would be a great quad to bring with me, but like truly this does not get me excited to do my eyeshadow. And then I also have the Makeup by Mario Glam quad. This is the Bronzy Glam quad. I just have these shades throughout many other palettes in my collection, and I just like, I like these honestly, I like all the shimmery shades, and like this is a great matte brown shade, but I have this matte brown shade throughout my collection and likely have the other shimmers throughout my collection as well. So this could potentially be a declutter as well. I don't know. I just feel like I maybe don't need this one as I'm looking through the palettes that I have not used. I have not used this year. I have not played with color much at all this year. I've been very, very busy the last like 4 to 5 months, and I just didn't use it the first like 3 months of the year. So this really has not gotten any use out of me. This is not something I want to declutter though. Like I really want to get some use out of this and have some fun with this palette. So I need to pull this out, get myself inspired to reach for this one. But that is where we stand with this. Next up, I have the Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes. Now, I used this palette so much last year that I feel like I sort of just got burnt out, and that kind of carried over into 2022. But I think this is an amazing palette, especially again thinking about like work travel and stuff. This would be a great palette to travel with. And honestly, this is just a great standard neutral palette. I will not declutter this because I know I'll get great use out of this. I just got burnt out by this because I had been using it so much trying to hit pan, and I did hit a pan in this shade, but I have not reached for this one yet in 2022. I also have another palette that I used to love and still do really love, but just haven't gotten use out of lately. It's the Tarte Young, Wild and Cruelty Free palette. This is the Unleashed palette. It looks like this. I do really enjoy this palette. I will say there are a couple of disappointing shades, specifically Hawkward was very disappointing to me, but I really did love this palette at one point and do still think the quality is really nice. I just need to reach for this one. I don't think I'll end up decluttering this in my palette declutter, at least not my next one coming up. Maybe this needs to be put in like a palettes on their last hurrah / chopping block style of video, because looking at it, I'm like, I like it, but do I really need it? But I'm not yet ready to declutter it. Regardless, I have not used this yet at all in 2022. My Juvia's Place Nomad palette, I won't declutter, but I have not yet used this in 2022. I did hit a pan in this last year. This is something that I would love to reach for more frequently in the fall. I barely wore any makeup at all last fall due to things going on in my personal life, which I hope this fall I'm wearing more makeup, and I anticipate I'll get a ton of use out of this palette, but I have not yet reached for that one yet in 2022. Also, my Nabla Dreamy palette, I haven't reached for yet in 2022. I definitely love the Nabla Dreamy 2 more than the Dreamy 1. However, there are still some great neutrals as well as some great shimmers in this palette. I'm not yet ready to declutter this, but I do need to get use out of this if it's going to remain in my collection, and I have not used that one yet this year. Nor have I used my Tom Ford Meteoric quad, which cost me $88, and honestly, it's a little bit pathetic that I've reached for this so infrequently in my collection considering how much this cost. I do kind of wish I went for like a more neutral quad, like a brown quad that I could get more use out of rather than this mauve quad. I still think this is a beautiful quad. I don't anticipate I'll declutter this in the near future. I don't necessarily know that I would go back and repay $88 for this, especially considering I have not reached for this yet in 2022, but definitely need to get some more use out of this. And then two from Melt Cosmetics that I have not yet reached for this year, which I swear I have, but looking at my notes, I haven't, so I'm just following my spreadsheets. I have the Melt Rust palette. Again, I know I'll get a ton of use out of this come the fall time, and I honestly think this is a beautiful palette. I do have a pan in this and I love the shades. I just haven't reached for it yet in 2022. Also, the Melt Gemini palette I do really love and enjoy. I just haven't reached for this. This is again a very grungy fall themed palette in my opinion, and I anticipate I will get some use out of this quite frequently at the tail end of 2022 when we reach like the September, October, November months. My BH Cosmetics Lunar New Year palette is like honestly just a regret in general for purchasing. I've used this a couple times, but like honestly, I think this will be something that I declutter. I just never should have purchased this, but alas I did. This hasn't gotten any use out of me, and I'm not honestly excited about that. Two palettes that are more like fall themed that I know I'll get use out of come the fall time are my two Alien Cosmetics palettes. So I have the Not Normal palette, and honestly, even if I didn't use this, I don't know if I could get myself to declutter this just because I love the artwork on the packaging. This is the Not Normal palette. It kind of reminds me of the ABH Subculture palette with like a twist, more of like a purple palette as opposed to like the grungy greens and blues in the Subculture, but I still really enjoy this palette and I'm excited to reach for this more towards the fall time. And then I also have the Hauntingly Gorgeous palette, which again is not like the most everyday wearable palette, but I feel like I mostly purchased this for the artwork, as well as I was really excited about this matte like lavender periwinkle purple shade. I do really like the two shimmer shades in here. These reds I don't think I'll get use out of, but I do like some of the matte shades. Like I feel like they're very unique to my collection, and again I think I'll get more use out of this come the fall time, so not too worried about these, but I have not yet used these in 2022. My Artist Couture Supreme Bronze palette is a favorite in my collection. I just haven't used this yet, and honestly when I was going through my list I was like, dang, I need to pull that. It's the summertime. I love this palette. I love the tones for this time of year. Let's get some use out of it. So that is what I intend to do in August with that palette. And then I have a large stack of Colourpop palettes that I haven't used. So up first we have the Sweet Talk palette. It took me forever to finally purchase this palette. I swear I've used this year, but my notes tell me differently. So I could be wrong on this, but this is just very pinky, and I'm not like a huge pink eyeshadow person, so like I don't know if I really need this in my collection. I feel like I keep this because of the Super Shock shadow, but like I could probably find something similar to the Super Shock. I honestly definitely feel like I could find something similar to this Super Shock shade throughout my collection, so I feel like Maybe this will be one I end up decluttering. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. I have my Colourpop Mandalorian palette. I do really like this palette. It's just obviously a green palette, so it's not like the most everyday wearable, and just haven't gotten use out of this. I also have my Going Coconuts palette, which again, I swear I've used this year, but again, my notes tell me differently. Very beautiful, neutral palette. I don't see myself decluttering this, and honestly, I feel like I should have gotten more use out of that than I have. I also have the Colourpop That's Taupe palette, which is neutral, cool leaning. I do actually really enjoy this palette, not quite as much as I thought I would when I purchased this, but still should have more use out of this, and I'm disappointed in myself that I have not yet reached for this in 2022. The Wild Child palette is also a favorite of mine. Like, I love this color story. I'm never disappointed with looks that I've created from this palette, but I am disappointed I have not yet reached for this in 2022, so I definitely need to do that. I also have the Colourpop On Cloud Blue palette. I feel like I don't necessarily know that I need this palette. Maybe I should depot like the shades in here. I feel like I would potentially get use out of or want. I feel like I've kept this because it's super unique to my collection, but I literally never reach for blue eyeshadow. So like, do I really need it in my collection? Probably not, but like honestly, I'm not sure. I have the Colourpop Making Mauves palette. I really do enjoy mauve tones, and I anticipate I'll get more use out of this in the fall time. There was a moment this like February, March, where it felt like every single eyeshadow or every single cosmetic brand was coming out with a mauve eyeshadow palette. So I was full of mauves in my collection and just was not reaching for this, but I do really like this one. I think it's beautiful, and this is not one I intend to declutter. And then I have a stack of Colourpop quads I have not yet used this year. So up first, I have the Libra palette, which is again like a pinky palette. It's very similar to the, where is it? In my opinion, it's very similar to the Creamsicle palette, and I prefer the Creamsicle palette to the Libra palette. I don't know, but I also am like, do I need this shade? No, I probably have that. I honestly could see myself decluttering Libra, probably keeping Creamsicle, but regardless, I have not used either of these. I also have the Virgo palette, which is kind of like cool toned purple. I just feel like I have these shades in my collection, and I do really like the Colourpop quads, but again, I haven't been reaching for makeup as frequently as usual, and I just have the tones in my collection. I have the Taurus palette, which I am a Taurus, so I can't see myself decluttering this. I also really enjoy like just the color story of the quad with this, and I reached for this quite a bit last fall, so I could have potentially just been feeling burnt out the first half of the year. And then I also have this one. This is the Sparkler palette. I feel like I probably have these shades in my collection. It's good quality, but like I probably have these shades in my collection, so like, do I really need it? I'm honestly not sure. Probably not. Regardless, I have not yet used this year. Really quickly, I'm going to do like an intermission to pause with these newer palettes-ish to my collection. These came into my collection at the end of last year. Haven't used them. I have the Wander Beauty Wanderess palette. And like looking at this, I'm like, is this something that even like excites me at all? Like I should just pass this along without even trying, because honestly, I'm not inspired or motivated by this at all. I have the Ace Beauty Falling For You palette, which actually looks like a really fun palette with some fun colors. I just have not gotten around to trying this yet. I still have the Oma Beauty Coming to America palette, which I swear I've owned in my collection for over a year now and have used maybe 2 times. So like I really need to get some use out of that. The Lime Crime Venus 3 palette. I can't remember how this came into my life. I have tried it, but honestly, I just did not love it. This is definitely something I could see myself decluttering, especially since I haven't felt motivated to reach for it in the last 6 months minimum. I have the Ace Beauty, not Ace Beauty, the Aether Beauty Amethyst Crystal Gemstone palette. I've owned this in my collection for so long, and I like have just barely used this. Like it's actually pathetic. Like I either need to use this or truly just declutter it. I think because it's so cool toned, I feel like I can't get that great of use out of it, but truly like my excuses are just pathetic. Like I need to use this or just declutter it, honestly. But I want to try it because I do love Aether Beauty. And then I have this one from Illamasqua, which I got in a boxy charm. Used it a couple of times and honestly just didn't feel that motivated or inspired by it, but still kept it around in my collection. So this is another one I need to like either use or just declutter. Like just pick, girl, just pick. I feel like I need to just declutter that. I've got some Natasha Denona that I have not used. I have my Sunrise palette. This, I believe, was my first midi palette that I ever purchased. Might be the first midi palette that Natasha Denona ever came out with. I do have a pan in this. I think it's a beautiful color story. I just haven't reached for it yet this year, and that's truly pathetic. This is the perfect time of year to reach for this as well, like perfect spring summer color story. So I need to get my button gear and use this. Also the Zendo palette. This just didn't turn out to be an absolute favorite of mine. There's definitely some great shades in here as well as some dud shades in here, and it just kind of like, it's an okay palette, which is why I feel like I don't reach for it. But again, I just need to get some use out of this. Like, it's in my collection. I don't want to declutter it, so I need to like at least use it. So like, let's use it. Then I also have these two minis. I have the mini retro palette, which I actually do really love this palette, and I don't know why I haven't reached for this yet this year. I will not be decluttering this. I love especially the shimmers in this, as well as this matte shade. So like, girl, get it together and use it. And then I have this mini 3-pan palette, the mini 3-pan Biba. This came in as Sephora favorites. I used it towards the tail end of last year and just haven't used it since. This is a great palette, especially like for just like your most basic, simple, everyday eyeshadow look. Like, this is perfect. I won't be decluttering this. I just need to use it. One last Aether Beauty palette I have not yet used this year is the Aether Beauty Amartine Mini Crystal palette. Looks like this. Would go perfectly with the Amethyst palette. Just haven't used this. Used this quite a bit last year and really loved it, so should use it again. I do have some Pat McGrath palettes. I have three of her quads. I have this one, the Fleur Fantasia. Honestly, I should maybe declutter this. This could be, sorry, my air fryer is going off. This is like a maybe declutter. I'm honestly not sure. I probably won't declutter it because I can't get myself to declutter Pat McGrath, but like, Then I have the Voyeuristic Vixen, which I won't declutter. I actually love this one. I think it's beautiful, especially as a complimentary palette, but haven't used it this year. And I also love this one, just don't ever reach for it. This is the Interstellar Icon, and I think this is a really unique quad. It's really beautiful, and I really need to use it more frequently. In my opinion, Huda Beauty eyeshadow can be pretty hit or miss, but the 3 palettes that I have not yet used from her this year, all of them I really like. So I have the Huda Beauty Nude Rich palette, which looks like this. A really great palette in my opinion. I just haven't reached for it this year. I also have the Naughty Nude, which I swear I have reached for, but apparently I have not. So I'm definitely going to be pulling this out this week because I do love this palette. It definitely pulls a little bit more pink than I would like love. Like, sometimes I just wish these like browns were like more like true warm brown rather than like a pink, but still do love this palette. And then also the Wild Jaguar is a really beautiful cool toned option, and I really enjoyed using this last year, but I just haven't yet used it this year, so definitely need to use this. The Glamlight Pie palette I really liked, but also have others from Glamlight that I prefer over this one. So I don't know if I'm going to end up keeping this one. I could definitely see myself decluttering this just because I don't feel super excited to reach for this one. Obviously haven't reached for it for 6 months, and that was one that I was like going through my palettes pulling out, and I was like, okay. But the Glamlight Chocolate Martini palette was a favorite palette of mine towards the end of last year, and I'm really disappointed that I haven't reached for this year. I love this palette, and I am putting this top of list to get to using because I think this is a beautiful palette that actually offers more versatility than meets the eye. So I need to use this more because I really loved every single look that I created with this palette last year, and I'm very disappointed I haven't reached for this yet in 2022. These two NARS palettes apparently I have not reached for. The Climax I wasn't super like surprised by. This was an okay palette. It wasn't the best quality in my opinion. I definitely preferred the Summer Solstice last year, but I still like this palette. I think it has some fun pops of especially shimmers, and I'm going to keep this in my collection. It's a more fall themed palette, so hoping to get more use out of it in the fall time. But my Summer Solstice I was obsessed with last year around this time, and pulling these palettes out was definitely motivation for me to use this again because I was like truly obsessed with this palette last year. So disappointed I haven't reached for this not even one time this year. Just a small stack of palettes left. I have this Nomad Cosmetics palette, which I'm disappointed in, but also not surprised in, just because I wasn't super impressed with the quality of this last year. This is the Nomad what is this? The Iceland Fire and Ice palette. I don't know, color story wise, it would really have to impress me to use these shades more frequently. I don't necessarily want to declutter this because it's the only palette I have from this brand. There are definitely some palettes that I'm more interested in, like color story wise. I don't want to declutter this, but I also just don't feel inspired to use this because I feel like the shimmer shadows specifically just don't like last on my eyes. So I don't know, that's how I feel about that. The Odin's Eye Verandy palette, I just have not reached for, but I love the Odin's Eye formula. It's just like this color story isn't super exciting to me. I feel like I really keep this around for this blue shade. There goes my air fryer again. Do I need this for those two shades? Oh, it's like those two shimmer shades I keep this around for. This would be like a maybe in my palette declutter. We'll see. We'll see what my goals are for my palette declutter, but like I probably don't need this in my collection, but I don't know if I can get myself to declutter it. My Dose of Color Sassy Sienna palette, I do love, I just haven't reached for. This definitely gave me motivation to reach for this because this is the perfect time of year to reach for this color story. I love the Dose of Colors eyeshadow formula. It's an all matte palette, but that does not bother me. I've actually been reaching for and doing like all matte looks quite frequently lately, so I just really need to reach for this. My Kaleidos Flower Punk palette, I loved last summer and honestly just need to reach for this. It's definitely a unique color story, but I do really love it. And I definitely wouldn't be decluttering this. This definitely gave me motivation to pull this out and do some looks. Whoops. Please tell me I didn't ruin that. I didn't. And do some looks with that. I have my Juvia's Place, the Mauves palette. I haven't reached for since purchasing. I likely will declutter this palette just because Juvia's Place, some people are like die hard over the formula and I'm just not one of those people. And honestly, like this is the shade, the only shade that like, well, that is kind of pretty. I guess I would have to see if I have a shade like this in my single shadow collection to do, but I never reach for it. Like, I can find a single shadow shade like that. I probably will declutter this. That does not motivate me, and I have so many other like mauve-y, rosy tone palettes in my collection that I could dupe that with. And then my Persona Identity one. I love this palette. Why haven't I reached for this? I swear I have, but maybe I haven't. I need to because I freaking adore this palette, like every single shade, and this was so disappointing when I pulled this out. So definitely need to get some use out of this, but this is the last palette to share in all of the eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection that I have not yet used in 2022. I would love to know, are there any eyeshadow palettes in your collection that you have not yet used this year? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch this video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.